Welcome to the Clinical Podcast Series brought to you by the American Academy of Optometry Foundation. The topic for today's episode is treatments for dry age-related macular degeneration, therapeutic avenues, clinical trials, and future directions. I'd like to thank our host, Dr. Mila Brujic, our topical expert, Dr. Jessica Haynes, and our topical editor, Dr. Kat Hogan. And now it's my pleasure to begin today's broadcast.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mila Brujic, and I want to thank the American Academy of Optometry Foundation for the partnership on this podcast. And today we're joined by Dr. Jessica Haynes. Dr. Haynes, thank you and welcome. Please give the audience a little bit of a background on yourself.
Thank you so much for having me. So I'm Dr. Jessica Haynes. I work primarily at the Charles Retina Institute in Germantown, Tennessee, and also work as consulting faculty at the Southern College of Optometry.
That's great. So this review paper that we're going to be talking about is right up your alley. It's the treatments for dry age-related macular degeneration, therapeutic avenues, clinical trials, and future directions. Why don't you give us a brief summary on the overview paper and really why it's important to us when we're caring for patients?
So as optometrists, we are the ones who are primarily seeing patients with dry macular degeneration. And we have had treatments now for exudative macular degeneration going on a couple of decades. But for our patients who have dry macular degeneration, we are still kind of stuck in the same realm that we've been in, talking about lifestyle changes, risk modifications, vitamin supplementation, and essentially just monitoring the patient to see if they do convert to exudative AMD. So this paper goes through numerous drugs that are currently in clinical trials that are investigated for many different stages of dry AMD, from your more intermediate stages to your advanced stages with geographic atrophy. And it looks at the different mechanisms that are being evaluated as well. And while nothing is currently approved, it is nice, at least as a reminder, to know there's a lot that is in the works. And if something ever does get approved for this, we want to be essentially ready to go, ready to identify the patients who would be of a benefit or who it would be of benefit for, so that we can make the appropriate referrals and change our practice patterns.
So Jessica, of the current kind of options that are being studied, do you see one or two of these that are most promising that you feel we're probably going to have access to most quickly, and what that actually means to us as we're caring for patients?
So, in the realm of treating geographic atrophy, at least in the recent history, it has been kind of like a hurry up and wait sort of situation. So there's been a few drugs who've gotten a lot of buzz. We get really excited about it. People start talking about them at meetings. And, notoriously within recent years, like lampalizumab that was going into phase 3 trials that eventually, was dropped. But so it's easy to get excited about these things, but you still never know exactly what's going to happen. But the current drug from Apellis, the APL2 drug that's a complement factor inhibitor, did perform really well as far as slowing down the progression or the rate of growth of geographic atrophy in its phase 2 trials, and has recently reported some phase 3 data and has been going up for FDA approval. So it's one of those situations that it may, when it changes, when or if this drug gets approved, that's going to be a major change in how we manage these patients.
Jessica, are these injections, are these orals, are these drops? How is it administered to the eye?
That is such a good question. So the APL2 drug is an intravitreal injection, and the study was looking at either every 4 to 8 weeks as far as treating the patient. But other drugs are administered all kinds of ways. So you're talking about oral vitamin supplements, topical drops, intravenous medications, intravitreal medications. So there's a wide variety of ways in which these are or could potentially be administered.
So if you could kind of share something with our audience that they could maybe share with our patients to give them hope in these areas of, in particular, dry AMD, geographic atrophy, what would that be? Like, what would it be that you would say, here's what you can share with your patients where it's really promising on the horizon?
So I do share with my patients that there are numerous drugs that are currently being investigated for dry macular degeneration. For patients, it is very frustrating living with macular degeneration, going through levels of vision loss from the dry disease and the progression of geographic atrophy. And patients see these advances in science, as we know, talking about things like one day we may have commercial flights to the moon, but you can't fix, my eyes. And it's very frustrating for them. So I do think it's important to at least let them know there are numerous drug trials going on. This is a very complicated disease. It is not one that is easy to fix, but it's not as if nobody is working on this problem.
We're getting better and better at catching these conditions earlier. I remember, the advanced fundus photography and the confocal scanning lasers. The images that we just acquire are unbelievable, and the OCT images, the level of change that you can detect is unbelievable. Do you foresee a day where we even start proactively treating individuals at even the early phases or earliest phases of disease to help prevent progression to anything that's visually consequential?
That's very possible. And again, some of these trials are looking at treating more of like your intermediate stage patients. It's very difficult for your early patients, or even what we talk about now with like the preclinical macular degeneration that you might see on dark adaptation. It is really hard to find evidence of something that truly slows down the progression of the disease, because most endpoints in clinical trials are things like conversion to advanced stage disease. And if you have someone who's at this early stage or preclinical stage, you're going to have to follow them for 20 years to see how many people change. And that's a really tough thing with finding treatments for dry macular degeneration. Think about finding treatments for exudative AMD. You don't have to follow a patient that long to see if a drug works or doesn't. Because if the patient has exudative AMD and they're left untreated, their vision's going to go south very fast. Versus these early stage patients, it's very difficult to have a trial that lasts long enough to identify, what's truly going to work for them. But even still, I mean, that's possible. These things are all possible.
It's an interesting space, Jessica. You've enlightened us today. I think it's really, really unique to see where we were even 5, 10 years ago, and where we are and where we're heading. And I think that's one of the most encouraging things for our macular degeneration patients. I think a lot of times these individuals want to know two things. They want to know they're in good hands with the care that we're providing, and they want to know if something is available that can help them, and just giving them at least the caveat that there's research on your type of macular degeneration, oftentimes for these patients is unbelievably encouraging, because right now, I mean, it's really lifestyle, it's really ARIDS too, and there's not much else we have for these patients. So they are, even when we mention it, they are encouraged just at the prospect of having something at some point. So, Jessica, I do want to thank you for being on this episode. Again, I think this was a great overview, and thank you for the American Academy of Optometry Foundation as well too for the partnership with this podcast series.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And a special thanks to Cooper Vision for their educational grant to make it all happen.